In a world where the thrill of adventure often comes with its own risks, there are stories that remind us just how fragile life can be. Today, we dive into some of the most gripping and tragic diving accidents in recent history. Stories of human courage, costly mistakes, and the devastating consequences that followed. From deep, dark caves to murky lake beds, these divers faced environments where one wrong move could lead to disaster. On a serene summer day in 2021, the waters of Scapa Flow, off the Orkney Islands in Scotland, became the backdrop for a tragedy that no one could have foreseen. David Police, a 57-year-old diver from Chellaston, Derbyshire, was living his dream, exploring the wreck of the SMS Brahma, a German mine-layer cruiser scuttled during the aftermath of World War I. It was a kind of bucket list dive every experienced diver longs for, but what was meant to be an adventure turned into a nightmare. David had joined a group of friends for a week-long dive holiday, excited to explore the wreck of the Brahma, which rests at a depth of 36 meters on its starboard side. The wreck is popular with recreational divers, as it's largely intact. As a seasoned diver, David had undergone several training courses, preparing himself for the challenges of deep water exploration. However, as experienced as he was, a crucial mistake was made, one that would have dire consequences. On 27th of June 2021, David disappeared during a dive. His dive team, unaware of the danger unfolding, continued their search, but to no avail. The following day, a local diver found his body, face down and lifeless, approximately 20 meters from the wreck. A post-mortem confirmed the cause of death: drowning. An inquest at Derby Coroner's Court in September 2021 revealed a chilling detail. The equipment David had relied on during the dive had a fatal flaw. The wing inflator hose, which helps a diver control buoyancy, was disconnected when he entered the water. A dive expert confirmed that no mechanical defects were found on the gear itself, but the missing hose connection meant he could not regulate his buoyancy and descended uncontrollably. It was a moment that sealed his fate. Assistant Coroner Sophie Lomas, who oversaw the inquest, delivered a heart-wrenching conclusion. While she ruled that David's death was accidental, she stated that it could have been prevented if proper pre-dive safety checks had been conducted. Lomas explained that, had the hose been connected, David would have been able to control his buoyancy and prevent a rapid, uncontrollable descent. Unfortunately, the team was unable to act in time, as David was already too far gone by the time they realized something was wrong. It is unlikely his team members would have been able to do anything in the limited time available. The reality is, because the hose was not connected from the moment David entered the water, sadly, the outcome was set, Ms. Lomas told the court. The coroner's remarks went beyond just the specifics of this tragic incident. Lomas pointed to a troubling aspect of the diving community: complacency. She highlighted that experienced divers, like David, often performed fewer team checks, relying on their own knowledge and skills. This attitudinal shift, as she called it, led to the failure to conduct an essential check that would have saved his life. In a poignant message to the diving community, Lomas stressed the importance of personal and body checks, regardless of experience level. Carrying out personal and body checks can have a significant impact in terms of what follows, she said. It's not a gap in training or knowledge, but a simple often overlooked step that could make the difference between life and death. Had those checks happened, the wing inflator hose could have been noticed and corrected prior to his entry to the water. The death of David Police has reverberated through the diving world, leaving a somber reminder that no amount of experience can replace the importance of safety checks. It's a lesson that many will carry forward, ensuring that the next time they enter the water, they will do so with the knowledge that every check counts. On July 6, 2022, two experienced Polish divers, Kristoff Balaki and Dominik Dubaj, tragically lost their lives during a dive to the Le Polynesian wreck off Malta's coast. What began as an adventurous exploration turned into a deadly series of events where heroism, negligence, and a series of critical mistakes led to a fatal outcome. Kristoff Balaki, a well-respected diver and instructor, had been diving with his dive club, Diving Explorers. Kristoff organised diving trips to the erythral coast of Malta on several occasions. Known for his experience, leadership, and nickname Tato, meaning dad in Polish, Kristoff was a mentor to many. Kristoff was obviously a very experienced diver and instructor. Dominik, on the other hand, was a relatively new diver, about 2 years of diving, and was new to closed-circuit rebreather diving. On this fateful dive, he and Dominik encountered serious issues at 65 metres, far deeper than the 50 metres originally reported. Dominik, during the dive, experienced a closed-circuit rebreather malfunction, where his wing bladder was filling with air, which put him into rapid, uncontrollable ascent. It was well known and talked about in that group that in a situation like this, that it's better to have one person dead rather than two. But Kristoff was a good person and would not be able to live if he had not attempted to save Dominik. He tried to help Dominik, but this put both of them into that tragic situation. Dominik panicked and froze, and unfortunately did not exhale out on his way up to the surface. Another diver, a part of the dive club, by the name of Veribek, told Times of Malta she was taking some footage of the dive when, at some point, her camera stopped working and the current was strong, so she resurfaced. As soon as I got on the boat, the two divers popped to the surface, she said. They were both conscious at that point, but it was clear that something was wrong. When they breached the surface, Dominik was already foaming and bleeding profusely from his mouth, which was due to his ruptured lungs. They had both skipped an hour of required decompression stops, which are critical from preventing decompression sickness. Kristoff tried to help him, but knew there wasn't much he could do. He swam back to the chartered boat and got on and told them about the situation. He placed himself on oxygen and wanted to replace his diving tanks with new ones and jumped to do the decompression stop, but they stopped him from doing that. Eventually, the armed forces of Malta showed up and started to treat both of them and drive them to the shore towards the Mater Dei hospital, although the EMTs pretty much gave up on Dominik because he was estimated to have died within 30 minutes of him surfacing due to drowning. Kristoff lost feelings in his legs on the way to the hospital in the ambulance. Kristoff, who was conscious and alert initially, was taken to a hyperbaric chamber for treatment of decompression illness, and everyone thought he was going to be okay. Early signs indicated he might survive, but the situation quickly deteriorated. By 6:31 p.m, Kristoff went into cardiac arrest. In a tragic twist, a critical error in the medical treatment that followed played a significant role in Kristoffs' death. The diving and hyperbaric medicine consultant who was responsible for his care left the hospital for an extended period to watch a soccer match and refused to answer his phone, leaving a junior doctor, still in training, to handle the diver's treatment. When Kristoffs' condition worsened, the junior doctor asked for help, but the request was ignored. By the time the consultant returned, Kristoffs' condition had worsened severely. The consultant had misdiagnosed the situation over the phone, initially suspecting oxygen toxicity rather than decompression illness. Equipment malfunctions, a miscalculation in Kristoffs' treatment, and a delay in responding to his worsening symptoms ultimately led to his death, just 38 minutes after the consultant's return. A judicial inquiry into this incident has led to startling conclusions. While the dive centre, Dive Shack Scuba School, was cleared of any negligence, the consultant could face criminal charges. The inquiry found that the consultant's absence during critical moments and reliance on an inadequately trained junior doctor contributed to Kristoffs' death. This tragic outcome may see the consultant facing charges of involuntary manslaughter, a punishment that could include up to 4 years in prison and a fine of £10,000. Kristoff Balaki, a legend in the diving community, is remembered as a hero. Kristoff's immediate response was heroic. Despite knowing the risks, that he would be sacrificing his own decompression time to help, he went back into the water, attempting to aid his struggling dive partner. His sacrifice to help a fellow diver ultimately cost him his life. Friends, colleagues, and fellow divers have all spoken of his unwavering dedication to the sport and his deep respect for those he mentored. He was more than an instructor. He was a father figure to many, a mentor, and a friend. As the diving community mourns, it's clear that this incident highlights the risks divers take, not just in the depths of the ocean, but in the hands of those tasked with saving them in times of crisis. The lessons learned here are stark. The importance of proper training, the necessity of timely medical intervention, and the critical role of responsibility when it comes to diving safety. Kristoffs' death and the mishandling of his treatment serves as a stark reminder that, in the world of diving, every second counts, and sometimes a single mistake can cost a life. In the eerie stillness of Norway's Plura cave system, one of the most experienced cave divers in the world met an untimely fate. Gerard Hyers, the general manager of Dive Right and a legend in the diving community, was a man who lived for the thrill of exploring the deepest, darkest caves beneath the surface. But on April the 3rd, 2023, during what was meant to be a routine checkup dive, tragedy struck, leaving the diving world stunned and heartbroken. Plura is not your average dive spot. It's the deepest cave in northern Europe and a bucket list location for cave divers. With its massive limestone and marble passages and crystal clear water that seems to stretch endlessly, it's a diver's dream. But don't be fooled by its beauty. Plura is no place for the faint of heart. The water here is freezing, ranging from 36 degrees Fahrenheit in winter to a slightly warmer 44 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer, and navigating its twists and turns is not for beginners. Gerard was no beginner. He was a seasoned pro with 2 decades of diving experience, and yet, even the most experienced divers can't always predict what lies ahead. Gerard, along with 2 other divers, was on a checkup dive to ensure their gear was functioning properly before a deeper exploration the next day. The dive started like any other, with all equipment in good working order and the divers in high spirits. They descended to a depth of 34 meters, 110 feet, for the first half of their dive, enjoying the beautiful underwater world in the wedding chamber before taking a quick break. After a brief surface interval, they descended again, this time deeper into the cave. The logs show that everything was going smoothly at first, But that's when things took a tragic turn. At around 16 minutes into the second dive, Gerard's dive log suddenly showed a sharp descent from 25 metres to 29 metres in under 20 seconds. His fellow divers, who were in front of him, didn't notice anything unusual at first. But then, chaos struck. Gerard's dive buddy, Diver 1, turned to assist Diver 2 with a backup light when he saw Gerard's light flickering erratically. By the time Diver 1 reached Gerard, he was already in full convulsions. Gerard's rebreather loop was not in his mouth, but had been closed off, suggesting that he had attempted to bail out, but wasn't able to get his regulator in time. In the blink of an eye, Gerard was fighting for his life, trapped underwater, his body seized by an unexplained medical event. Diver 1, determined to save his friend, tried desperately to secure Gerard's airway, but the seizures continued for several minutes. As Gerard's convulsions subsided, Diver 1 swam past him toward the exit, a harrowing 250-metre journey through dark, narrow passages. Gerard's condition was still dire as they neared the exit. Diver 2 was already alerting the surface, and help was on the way. But as they reached the surface, Gerard's fate had already been sealed. Despite immediate CPR and oxygen, the medical team couldn't revive him. 2 hours of frantic resuscitation efforts proved in vain. The diving community was quick to speculate on the cause of Gerard's seizure, with many wondering if it was oxygen toxicity, a common risk for rebreather divers. After all, rebreathers can malfunction, causing dangerous spikes in oxygen levels that could lead to seizures. However, the preliminary report from the Divers Alert Network, DAN, ruled out oxygen toxicity. The logs didn't show any dangerous oxygen spikes before the event. Instead, it seemed Gerard's tragic fate was due to a medical condition, one he had battled before. Gerard had suffered a similar seizure in 2023, and his family history pointed to rare, unexplained seizures, triggered by factors like stress, dehydration, and overexertion. The diving world was shocked to learn that despite Gerard being in excellent shape, these underlying health issues, coupled with a recent viral infection, may have contributed to his seizure underwater. For Gerard, the cave that had once been his sanctuary became his tomb. In a place where he had spent countless hours honing his skills and conquering the depths, it was a medical event, not equipment failure, that claimed his life. Gerard Hire's death is a sobering reminder that even the most prepared divers can face dangers beyond their control. It also highlights the harsh reality of diving in extreme environments. What may seem like a routine dive can quickly turn into a fight for survival. The dive community will always remember Gerard Hires for his passion and expertise, but his death also serves as a wake-up call. Divers must remain vigilant about their health, even if they feel fine, and understand the risks that come with diving in extreme conditions. Gerard's legacy lives on, and his story will undoubtedly inspire divers to dive deeper, both in the cave and in their own understanding of the hidden dangers that lie beneath the surface. In May 2023, 20-year-old Joe Anderson, a student at Bethel University, embarked on what was supposed to be a summer job, clearing underwater weeds at Lac Lavant, a recreational lake in Apple Valley, Minnesota. A seemingly simple task, right? Wrong. This tragic event would turn into one of the most catastrophic incidents in recent Minnesota history, leading to a devastating loss of life and an unprecedented fine for the company involved. Joe was hired by Your Lake Aquatic Plant Management, a company with a questionable track record when it comes to diver safety. Their website boasted photos of teens knee-deep in weed-infested waters, But behind the shiny images was a darker reality. The company's divers were barely trained, and Joe, fresh to the job, was about to learn just how dangerous this under-regulated industry really was. On May 21st, Joe and a team consisting of 5 other inexperienced divers descended into the near-zero visibility waters of Lac Levant, a lake plagued by dense weed growth. The water wasn't just murky, it was like diving in a soup of weeds, where you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. Joe had no buddy to help, no real visibility, and certainly no extensive training for what was about to unfold. The dive was simple enough. Clear the weeds at depths of around 3 to 5 meters or 10 to 15 feet. Following a group surface check and having given the OK sign, Joe descended with the other divers. However, something went terribly wrong when Joe failed to resurface with the group after their initial dive. Panic set in as his dive buddies realized they couldn't see his bubbles rising to the surface. They immediately went back down, searching frantically. When they found Joe, it was already too late. His regulator was out of his mouth, and he was lying unresponsive on the lakebed. The group pulled him to the surface, where they attempted CPR. Emergency services arrived quickly, and although Joe still had a faint pulse, he was severely hypothermic and unresponsive. He was stabilized and moved to an intensive care unit at a nearby hospital, and later transferred to another unit, but he had only low blood oxygen levels, sporadic brain activity, and fluid in his lungs, the latter described by his family as not lake water, but probably as a result of the trauma from the accident. Despite best efforts to save him, Joe passed away 3 days later, on 24th of May, in the hospital. But what exactly went wrong here? The investigation that followed exposed a chilling chain of negligence. It turns out Joe had never been trained in scuba diving before. According to Minnesota's Occupational Safety and Health Administration, Joe's training consisted of only 10 to 15 minutes from an employee who wasn't even certified to dive. One of the factors in the incident was that Joe's weight belt was on inside out, preventing him from releasing it. Not only was the company's approach to training and safety woefully inadequate, but there was also no supervisor present to oversee the dive and ensure safe practices. Joe's death wasn't just tragic, it was preventable. As the investigation revealed, the company had no safe practices manual, and its employees weren't trained in basic first aid or CPR. This lack of preparation proved fatal when Joe's team was forced to perform a high-stakes rescue with no clear plan or understanding of emergency procedures. And the consequences for your lake aquatic plant management were severe. OSHA hit the company with 5 willful violations, a designation that's only given when a company knows hazards exist but makes no effort to correct them. The total fines added up to a staggering $730,000, the largest workplace fine in Minnesota's history. But your lake wasn't backing down. They contested the citations, hoping to reduce their responsibility for Joe's death. This tragic incident wasn't just a wake-up call for the company, but for the entire diving community. It highlighted how inexperienced divers were being put in dangerous conditions without the training or support they need. It's a cautionary tale that shows the deadly consequences of cutting corners in a job that requires not only skill, but life-saving knowledge. And Joe wasn't the only one. Just the year before, another diver died under similar circumstances while working for another company, Dive Guys of Wayzata, at Lake Minnetonka. That company was also cited for safety violations, and the fine was reduced after appeal. But the question remains, how many more young lives will be at risk if these reckless practices continue unchecked? In the end, Joe's death wasn't just a tragic accident. It was a failure of a system that prioritizes profits over safety and it cost Joe Anderson his life. As we reflect on this tragedy, remember, no job, no matter how simple it seems, is worth risking your life for, especially when safety isn't a priority. Joe Anderson may have been just starting out in life, but his death should serve as a stark reminder that we must never forget the importance of proper training, supervision, and safety measures, especially when dealing with something as unpredictable and dangerous as diving. Diving is one of the most inspiring and challenging activities in the world, but as we've seen today, it carries inherent risks that demand preparation, caution, and respect for the underwater world. These tragic accidents remind us of the fine line between adventure and danger. This has been Gripping Horror. Welcome to Wookie Hole, a small village nestled in the beautiful Mendip Hills, just outside the historic city of Wells. With a population of just 450, this tranquil village seems like an idyllic escape from the hustle and bustle of modern life. But there's more to Wookie Hole than meets the eye. This is the Wookie Hole disaster of 1981. Sandwiched between the Somerset Levels and the Mendips, Wookie Hole Village offers lovely places to explore. In high summer, Wookie Hole Village is thronged with visitors, all seeking entrance to the show caves. Not to mention the glorious mix of scenery, with the hills having woodland and reservoirs where you can find habitats for wildlife. Have you ever felt the magnetic pull of a place that seems to have a personality all of its own? That's exactly how Keith Potter, a fellow OUCC diver, felt when he first discovered the small and secluded town. To Keith, there was something about this town that set it apart from all the others. Perhaps it's the way the sunlight filters through the trees, casting a warm and inviting glow over everything. Or maybe it's the way the river that flows through the heart of the town glistens and sparkles in the sunlight, tempting you to take a refreshing dip. But as mentioned before, there's more to this town than just its picturesque scenery. For Keith, the real allure lay beneath the surface. As an experienced cave diver, he was drawn to the hidden depths of the nearby caves and underground rivers, eager to explore their mysteries and secrets. And as we follow in Keith's footsteps, we too begin to uncover the hidden wonders of this town that he was so mesmerized by. From the dry, massive caverns to the beautiful submerged sections, Keith knew this town was a true gem waiting to be discovered. Young, charming, and smart are all words used to describe Keith Potter. On paper, he seemed to have a one-way ticket to a successful life filled with dreams and aspirations. Being only 22 years old, he was a man of many talents outside of caving. His scholarship in medicine at Exeter College, Oxford, was surely the first step towards realizing his ambition to become a consultant physician. To those in the Oxford University Cave Club and others who knew him, his limitless enthusiasm not only for life, but for expeditions, be they to Mendip, Yorkshire, or Spain, was unmatched. Keith's contribution to caving, especially in the OUCC, was enormous. During the 1980 expedition to Pozo del Chitu, he took part in many pushing trips, offering his companions encouragement and showing determination to continue where others were prepared to turn back. Even in the most difficult circumstances, he retained his humor while remaining absolutely reliable. Most notably in 1981, after emerging from a 35-hour pushing trip into severe passages in which he sustained a knee injury and suffered agonizing friction sores in his groin, Keith was the first to reach Chitu's terminal sump. Despite being injured, tired, and thoroughly wet, he showed his determined character by spending hours searching for a bypass. Without Keith, the Oxford University Cave Club might still be trying to bottom their Chitu cave. Keith never took unnecessary risks. Indeed, his thoroughness and caution in unexplored passages could frustrate those less experienced team members, carried away with exploration fever. But that is exactly what made him an excellent cave diver. Which brings us to the Wookie Hole cave. Keith still had one more year to go before finishing the pre-clinical part of his medical training, and decided what better way to unwind from the pressure and stresses of medical school by taking a respite trip to Wookie Hole on November the 15th, 1981, a trip he had made before. Cave diving was in its infancy during the 1930s. In the beginning, explorers did not look at cave diving as a form of sport or a diving method. Rather, it was more of a means to reach a specific end while dry caving. Particularly in the United Kingdom, dry caving dates back hundreds of years. Yet, the water-filled sections of many caves kept explorers from making progress. In the case of the Wookie Hole caves, the original dive crew's goal was simply to get through the cave, bypass the water, and reach the next dry section. Thus, cave diving was born as a technique used to further cave expeditions, and has since transformed into both an activity and exploration tool in its own right. The first divers to take the plunge in Wookie Hole on the 14th of July 1935 were Graham Balcombe and Penelope Powell, who was affectionately known as Mossy. It is worth noting that Powell was the only female diver on the team, and today is considered one of cave diving's unsung pioneers. If you do some further research on her, you can read her story and learn of her tremendous contributions. Unfortunately, she has been left out of several surface-level records, including the Wookie Hole Caves Wikipedia page, which states that fellow crew member Jack Shepherd, not Powell, made the first dive with Balcombe. Powell and Balcombe's first dive had them wearing the standard diving equipment at the time, which included brass helmets, chest plates, canvas suits, and lead boots. They had to walk on their hands and knees along the cave floor in near zero visibility, dragging their breathing hoses and lifelines behind them as the unsettled silt flew all around them. Luckily, the details about the equipment they wore was well documented, and we have a fair understanding of what their dives likely looked like. It is interesting to note that the suits worn back then were made for male Navy divers, and Powell's did not fit her as it should. To fix the problem, tape was used in various places to ensure her suit was properly sealed. With the goal of further exploring the Wookie Hole caves in mind, the divers set up a base in the third chamber, and eventually made their way past the previously discovered fourth chamber to the fifth, sixth, and seventh chambers. They were unable to go any farther, as their base-fed airlines and weighted equipment restricted them from travelling more than 61 metres or 200 feet. Cave diving originated that midsummer day with Powell and Balcombe. Since then, thousands of tourists and very few divers have travelled to Wookie Hole in hopes of discovering more than their predecessors and pushing the boundaries of technical cave diving. One such diver was Keith Potter. Today, Wookie Hole is explored to Chamber 25, called the Lake of Gloom. Until this point, the cave is almost horizontal, going up and down, so the cave is partly water-filled and partly air-filled. But at the end of this chamber, the character of the cave changes. It starts to steadily go down. The sump is closed by gravel chokes after about 400 metres or 1,315 feet, and 90 metres or 290 feet below water level. This is the deepest point of the cave, and as the water level of the cave river is around 64 metres or 210 feet, this spot is about 26 metres or 85 feet below sea level. Keith Potter and fellow OUCC members arrived at Wookie Hole on November the 14th, 1981, hoping to push the boundaries of this undiscovered cave. The team parked their vehicles and began the trek to the cave. The parking lot is located at one end of the village, so in order to reach the cave, it must be crossed by foot, which is about a 10-minute walk. The first part of the village is full of shops, kiosks, and fish and chips. Then, at the paper mill, the Wookie Hole theme park starts. The cave tour is only one of numerous features of this theme park. The cave is on the southern escarpment of the Mendip Hills, and is the resurgence that drains the southern flanks of North Hill and Pen Hill. It is the second largest resurgence on Mendip, with an estimated catchment area of 46.2 square kilometres, or 17.8 square miles, and an average discharge of 789 litres, or 208 US gallons per second. The caves had been used by humans for around 45,000 years, demonstrated by the discovery of tools from the Paleolithic period, along with fossilised animal remains. Wookie Hole lays in the same limestone ridge as the famous Gorge Cave, only a few kilometres to the south. The limestone is covered by a layer of dolomitic breccia, which is less prone to solution. There are fewer cracks, and the chemistry of dolomite is different to limestone, which makes it a little less soluble. This difference explains many details of the cave formation. With morals high, Keith and the OUCC begin the penetration of the cave. The entrance to the Wookie Hole cave is on the right side of the valley, which means it is at the end of a gorge cut into the limestone by the river Axe. As the team step into this natural wonder, through Chamber 1, they were immediately mesmerised by the river Axe that gracefully flows through the cave, creating a stunning and unique landscape that left them awestruck. The Wookie Hole caves are not only a feast for the eyes, but also a site of special scientific interest, SSSI, for both biological and geological reasons, due to the breccia limestone. The river Axe is formed by the water entering the cave system and flows through the third and first chambers. From Chamber 1, it flows to the resurgence, through two sumps, the first being 40 metres or 130 feet, and the second being 30 metres or 98 feet long, where it leaves the cave and enters the open air. The river is maintained at an artificially high level and falls a couple of metres when a sluice is lowered to allow access to the 9th chamber and beyond. It should be noted that the first part of the cave, as far as the 3rd chamber, is open to tourists and lit by permanent electric lighting, but beyond that, it is accessible only to cave divers, who, as I mentioned, have still not probed all its secrets. The 1st and 2nd chambers pose no difficulty for Keith and the OUCC, and they navigated through them with ease. Upon reaching the 3rd chamber, the team set up camp, following in the footsteps of many previous explorers who had rested there before. Chamber 3, or Witch's Parlour, is famous for its size. A huge solution dome dissolved by the groundwater when the water level was much higher in the past. After setting up camp in the 3rd chamber, the team prepared their diving equipment and went over the plan to ensure that everyone was up to date on the purpose of the exploration, which was to explore the deepest recesses of the cave, located in Chamber 25. In addition to diving as far as possible, the team also planned to map new undiscovered sections of the cave. Unbeknownst to the group, Keith had ulterior motives for the dive. With all checks in place, the group continued deeper into the cave, equipped with their diving gear for the sumps further down. The subsequent chambers presented a stark contrast to Chambers 1 and 2. From here on out, the chambers were characterized by low and narrow clefts. Starting from Chamber 3, tight tunnels connected the subsequent chambers to each other. The total length of passages in this area was about 820 metres, or 2,690 feet. The group navigated through the twisting tunnels, manoeuvring past the narrow squeezes of Chambers 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, until they arrived at Chamber 9, also known as the Cathedral. The sense of anticipation and curiosity about what lies ahead is a feeling that most cavers experience, and Keith was no exception. Today, though, he was driven by an especially strong urge to venture further than ever before into Wookie Hole, eager to uncover new mysteries in its depths. This may be due to the fact that Keith had heard rumours of a hidden underground river system that flowed deep beneath the caverns of Wookie Hole. Unaware of the exact location, he spent countless hours studying maps and reading about the geological formations that lay beneath the surface, and he was convinced that he was on the brink of a groundbreaking discovery. After regrouping in Chamber 9, without waiting on the group, overcome with a youthful bliss, Keith inserted his mouthpiece and proceeded to attempt the Sump Dive between the 9th and 19th chambers, a long 200-foot, but now well-traversed route which he had successfully navigated before, but never gone beyond, which he was determined to change. There are 2 routes through the sump, and Keith set off first through the lower, deeper passage, leaving Martin Farr, one of the best cave divers in the country, to follow along the shallower route. Overcome with excitement of the unknown and emboldened by his previous experience diving the sump, Keith threw all caution to the wind, ready to navigate the passage with an intense surge of adrenaline coursing through his body. As he hurried and viciously pumped his legs through the passage, the speed of his movements made him increasingly lightheaded, whilst drastically increasing his heart rate. Suddenly, his vision was engulfed in total darkness, as if a switch had been flipped. As Keith pushed deeper into the sump of the cave system, his sense of excitement began to give way to fear and uncertainty. He swam uphill from the elbow of the sump, which was 70 feet deep. The water grew colder and the current stronger, making it increasingly difficult for him to swim. As a result, he couldn't breathe in enough air to sustain the strenuous exertion on his body. His lungs burned for air, but he refused to turn back, convinced that he was so very close to the end of the sump, a wishful way of thinking that was attributed to the disorientation he was experiencing. Despite his growing desperation, Keith continued to press on until he could no longer ignore the warning signs of his body. He was beginning to shut down. His vision began to blur beyond a point of no return, and his muscles grew weak. Rather than taking a break, he made the ill-fated decision to push on. He was determined to make it to the end of the sump, reaching airspace in the 19th chamber, and continuing his exploring until he found the underground river. In the end, Keith gave it all he got until there was nothing left to give. His determination proved to be his downfall. His lungs were completely depleted of air, causing him to essentially suffocate to death. When Farr finally reached the end of the sump, he discovered Keith laying in 10 feet of water, motionless and with his air tank mouthpiece floating free. Keith was in plain sight of airspace, at the very end of the flooded section. Farr immediately dove to retrieve him, and other members of the group soon joined in the rescue effort. They desperately attempted artificial respiration for nearly an hour, but unfortunately it was too late, and Keith had already passed away. In a panic, the group rushed out the cave system, exiting the left side of the valley, close to the spring of the River Axe below a steep limestone cliff face. The way back is following a tree-lined canal path, a trail along the paper mill canal, which was built in 1857. Alas, after reaching their vehicles, they called for help, and the body recovery for 22 Keith Porter began. "Dave, I'm afraid I've got bad news. Keith's dead." His funeral was located in Wedmore, not 5 miles from where he died. To those in the Oxford University Cave Club and others who knew him, his death remains almost incomprehensible. Not even his funeral, held near his parents' home at Wedmore, really brought home the fact that the Oxford University Cave Club would never see him bounding into the bar during a midweek club meeting or share his limitless enthusiasm for future trips. Although the OUCC had all agreed to erect a memorial in honour of Keith, they felt a little uneasy about doing so because they remembered how Keith himself had been dismissive of a similar plaque commemorating a caver in Black Shiver Pot, Yorkshire. Keith had once said that the caves were permanent while cavers were transitory. Despite their reservations, the group ultimately decided to place the memorial at the bottom of G2's steep entrance climb, where it would be visible to future cavers. The plaque was crafted from stainless steel and bore the following inscription: Posel del G2, 1,139 meters. Keith Potter, who died diving in Wookie Hole, 14/11/81, the first man to bottom this cave. Once again, we are confronted with a tragic story that showcases the perils of cave diving. Despite awareness of the unforeseen dangers that can arise when exploring these underwater mazes, accidents can still occur with devastating consequences. In the heart of Hays County, Texas, lies a clear, calm pool of water. It's undeniably beautiful, and it's one of the most dangerous diving spots in the entire world. These serene waters are a gateway to deep, sunken caves, and it is here that at least 12 people, including experienced divers, have lost their lives. But what makes this seemingly idyllic spot so dangerous? And what is it about those crystal clear waters that draws people in? Jacob's Well, despite what the name implies, is not a well at all. It's actually an artesian spring, an underground cave system 140 feet deep and over 4,300 feet in length. This natural phenomenon, the second largest fully submerged cave in Texas, has existed for untold millennia, though the first written mention of it came from Jacob de Cova back in the 19th century. Because of this, some believe the spring was named after him. The water that feeds the deceptively calm spring comes from an underground reservoir known as the Trinity Aquifer, which keeps the water at an ideal 68 degrees Fahrenheit or 20 degrees Celsius all year round. Since the Lone Star State is known for its scorching summers, it's hardly surprising that many people flock to Jacob's Well in the summer months. Just beyond the surface of this oasis lurks a deep mystery, an irresistible siren song to many would-be explorers. And so, in order to understand why it is so easy to run into trouble in Jacob's Well, you need to know how the cave structure is shaped. In the first part of the caves, which is visible from the surface, features a vertical shaft reaching 25 feet down, culminating in a false bottom. Many people have safely dived their way down to this point before looking back up and letting the aquifer's outflow help them back toward the blue sky above the water surface. If you test this false bottom, however, you can find a hidden chamber with a low ceiling that leads on at a downward angle for 75 feet. At the end of the chute is a narrow crawl space that connects to a narrow room with a high ceiling containing an air pocket. If you reach this spot, then a tight squeeze is all that separates you from an enticing area known as the fourth passage. The passage to this fourth chamber had already claimed numerous lives, and, as we will see, it was still hungry for more. 20-year-old Kent Morpin wasn't worried about Jacob's Well's dangerous reputation. He was an experienced diver, working as assistant instructor at a Pasadena dive shop, and he was aware of the risk. He also knew that at least 4 others had lost their lives trying to explore the fourth passage, but Kent believed that he and his friend, 21-year-old Mark Brasher, knew what they were doing. Kent and Mark entered Jacob's Well shortly after midnight on September the 9th, 1979. Part of a larger group of around 20. They had arrived to the area late, but while the others set up camp, the 2 young men, along with a few others, decided that they just couldn't resist a late-night dive. Mark and Kent had not shared their plans of attempting this passage with the other divers in the group, so after they all made their way down to the false bottom, navigating through the first chamber with relative ease as planned, the other divers were surprised to find the 2 young men heading for the dangerous fourth passage, despite not having safety lines or backup flashlights. Kent, then Mark, took off their tanks to fit through the 18-inch wide entrance and slipped into the passage. Joe Moyer, another diver in the group, watched in horror as Mark vanished into the tunnel. He knew that Kent and Mark's steel tanks held less air than his aluminium one, and considering he was beginning to indicate that it was time to make his way back to the surface, he knew this spelled trouble for the reckless young men. Joe tried to get Mark's attention, shining and waving his flashlight. When that didn't work, he began to hit his tank with his knife, hoping that the sound would echo in the water, but he received no reply and the two young men were now out of sight. Frustrated and out of options, Joe did the only thing he still could. He propped up his flashlight and left it shining into the passage. He held on to the faint hope that he would help Kent and Mark find their way out. Joe swam back up. As he reached the surface, an eerie sight greeted him. The normally crystal clear water had turned an opaque brown. Joe's heart sank. This silty water could only mean one of two things. Either Kent and Mark had begun to panic, which stirred up the silt in the passage, or worse, they had been hit by a gravel slide. Regardless of which it was, Joe knew Kent and Mark were gone. The chances of surviving either of these scenarios was virtually none. About an hour later, and miles away, a former Navy diver and master scuba instructor named Dom Dibble was sound asleep when his phone began to ring. Fellow diver and police officer Paul Battaglia had called to deliver the bad news and ask for help. But the divers that would once more descend Jacob's world to look for the two young men knew that they weren't undertaking a rescue mission. Tragically, this was a body recovery. It was still dark when the rescue team arrived. The other members of Kent and Mark's diving group had already made several desperate attempts to locate them, all without success. One of the group's members had completed 290-minute dives back-to-back and told Don that he had seen Kent and Mark's bodies trapped beneath the gravel slide. At that, Don's suspicions were confirmed. The two men couldn't survive a slide like that, especially without sufficient oxygen in their tanks. Given the situation, Don was reluctant to dive before the sun rose. So, two other divers went ahead to assess the situation. They couldn't see either Kent or Mark, but they did see that the passage had become almost completely blocked with gravel. Arriving back at the surface, they expressed their concerns about the risk of a gravel slide, trapping whoever went next to the cave floors. On this advice, the decision was made to assemble a larger team and return in the daylight with more equipment. The group returned at 10 a.m. The next morning, and again 2 divers went down to assess the situation. Eventually, those 2 divers reached the passage that had been blocked with gravel and attempted to push the gravel back through the passage to create a wide enough opening for them to fit through. It didn't work. In fact, it just made things worse. Exasperated, the divers returned to the surface and reported what they found. It was at this point that Don decided to go down himself. He squeezed into his wetsuit, strapped on his gear, and, accompanied by Game Warden Calvin Turner, began the descent for themselves. The 2 men made their way down carefully, leaving 2 extra tanks along the way. At last, they reached the opening that Kent and Mark had disappeared through. Sadly, it was clear that no one else was getting through there. While they thought through their next move, Don checked how much air he had left in his tank. At the depth he'd reached, he had about 10 minutes remaining. He decided to risk it. Slowly, Don stuck his head and shoulders through the narrow opening that led to the 4th passage. In one hand, he held the safety line that tethered him to the surface, and in the other, a flashlight. For a moment, Don couldn't see anything but gravel. Then, before he could react at all, the earth began to move. Suddenly, both of his arms were trapped by the weight of another gravel slide, small rocks flowing around and over him, making it impossible for him to signal to Calvin, still treading water behind him. Visibility went down to near zero. All he could see was the swirling silt and splintering gravel, gathering closer and closer. Don panicked. He couldn't stop his breathing from intensifying as he tried to free himself. His air was running out. He couldn't move, couldn't get free, couldn't even see to try. Don came to the chilling realization that he was about to die. As the gravel continued to pour in, it seemed to bring with it a feeling of cold resignation. He was trapped. There was no moving forward and no going back. Don reasoned that since he was already suffocating, it might be better to try something desperate. He spat out his regulator and started to drink the water surrounding him. His body, in a last-ditch effort at self-preservation, began thrashing violently to free itself. Miraculously, it worked, and Don came free. A few seconds later, he began to regain his bearings, peering through his flooded mask into the murky water. Don was relieved, to say the least, when he saw Calvin passing him the spare tank's regulator. But Don's troubles were far from over. His desperate inhale from the spare tank caused some of the air to go into his stomach, rather than his lung. As he and Calvin slowly made their way back up, that trapped air began to expand. It stretched the lining of his stomach, causing Don immense pain. Finally, as they approached the surface, it could stretch no more. The trapped air burst a hole in Don's stomach. After an agonizing extraction from the water, Don was rushed to Brooke Army Medical Center, where he remained in excruciating pain for hours before they discovered the rupture and rushed him to the operating room. But while Don recovered from surgery, the search for Kent and Mark continued. Tragically, despite best efforts from some of the top experts in the field, they were unsuccessful. 12 days after they've gone missing, the search was called off. Jacob's well had swallowed the two young men, and it was intent on keeping them out of everyone's reach. Once Don had recovered, he went back to Jacob's well with a group of other divers and cemented a metal grate over the lower section of the cave system. They wanted to make sure that what happened to Kent and Mark didn't happen again. It would be decades before the world would release its two victims. Most of Mark's remains were discovered 10 years after the incident. But it wasn't until the year 2000, 21 years later, that Kent's remains were found as a part of a routine mapping dive. On the same dive, the mapping crew found that the gates cemented in place by Don Dibble had been washed away, and the mysterious fourth chamber beckoned once more. Now, Jacob's well remained open to the public, though water access requires a permit. So, if the tales of terrible things happening in the dark, flooded caverns of Jacob's well haven't scared you away, and you're an experienced diver, you can still apply to see the fourth chamber for yourself. But keep in mind, you may never see the surface again. Nearly a decade ago, a very fatal tragedy occurred in a secluded deep blue hue river in Mindanao, Philippines. The Hinatuan Enchanted River is a flawless deep saltwater spring that flows into the Pacific Ocean. It is around 24 meters or 80 feet deep and is just barely long enough to be considered a river. Yet, the flow attracts visitors from around the world who want to experience the beautiful waters that locals have long thought to be miraculous. Underneath the entrancing blue waters lurks a cave system that plunges to great depths, contributing to the river's enchanting and mystical allure. Truly an exquisite and enigmatic location, boasting with unparalleled levels of charm that justifies its name as the Enchanted River of Hinatuan. Dr. Alfonso Amores was extremely captivated by the river's beauty and mystique, leading him to embark on 5 expeditions to the site since 2010. During his explorations, he extended the cave system below to a depth of 87 meters or 285 feet, driven by his fascination with the Enchanted River. However, during his 6th visit in 2014, tragedy struck, and he unknowingly took his final dive, leaving behind a legacy of passion and curiosity. This is the Enchanted River of Hanachuan disaster of 2014. The Hanachuan Enchanted River, also called the Hanachuan Sacred River, is a deep spring river on the island of Mindanao in the Philippines. It flows into the Philippine Sea and the Pacific Ocean at Bangray Talisay, Hanachuan, Surigao del Sur. It is found between the boundaries of barangays of Talisay and Camatong. It earned the moniker Enchanted River from the diplomat Modesto Forlan, who described the river in his poem entitled Rio Encantado. Hanachuan Bay, which is the habitat of various species of turtles, is located at its mouth. Its mouth also offers a safe anchorage against storms and typhoons. The river's unusual colours and unexplored depths have inspired various local legends. One story tells of fairies that added the colour of sapphire and jade to the river to make its unique shade. Local fisherfolk also report seeing fish in the river that cannot be caught through any means. According to locals, the river was called the Enchanted River because of the Encantos that dwell there, which in Filipino culture are mythical environmental spirits that are said to have the ability to appear in human form. Their legends also say that the river is haunted by supernatural beings, which act as its protectors. Since 2017, the local government of Hanachuan has prohibited tourists from swimming in the main pool due to preservation and maintenance. However, they have designated a swimming area for tourists near the centre of the lagoon, which is 10 metres or 33 feet away from the main pool. The first discovery and exploration to the cave of the Hanachuan Enchanted River was made by Alex Santos in 1999. The major exploration to the cave system started 11 years later, when a group of 3 cave divers, led by Dr. Alfonso Amores, with team members Benil Gastardo and Emigi Guillemot, entered the cave in February 2010. The major exploration led to the discovery of a hidden cave opening at 30 metres or 98 feet depth. Succeeding expeditions with Dr. Amores led to the discovery of the underwater caves chamber, referred to as Mayor's Chamber. During the 6th expedition of the cave history on June the 17th, 2014, is when the fatal tragedy of Dr. Amores occurred. Dr. Alfonso Amores, known in the island as Doc Boy, was brought up in the Old Apona Publican on Mactan Island, where he was born and raised. He grew up in a large family of 34 individuals and was surrounded by the quintessential Publican neighbourhood, which played a significant role in shaping his character and values. He always had a passion for medicine, ever since he was a child growing up on Mactan Island in the Philippines. He was fascinated by the human body and the intricate workings of its systems, and he knew from a young age that he wanted to pursue a career in medicine. After completing his undergraduate studies, Dr. Amores enrolled in the Cebu Institute of Medicine, where he earned his medical degree in 1971. He then set his sights on furthering his education and honing his skills in the field of plastic surgery, so he packed his bags and headed to the United States. With his extensive education and training complete, Dr. Amores set out to put his skills to use. He practiced plastic surgery in the US for nearly 2 decades, from 1982 to the year 2000. Despite his success in the US, Dr. Amores never forgot his roots in the Philippines. He remained connected to his homeland and often returned to visit family and friends on Mactan Island. He also provided charitable medical services to those in need in the Philippines, using his expertise to improve the lives of others. After practicing surgery for 20 years in the United States, Dr. Amores decided to return to his home country, the Philippines, to enjoy his retirement. But he was not the kind of man who would be happy to whittle away his years in a rocking chair while watching the seasons pass. He instead chose to do cave diving explorations. Unable to get satisfaction from breathing air or gas from a standard scuba setup, he embarked to get educated in the use of a closed-circuit rebreather. His weapon of choice was the Evolution closed-circuit rebreather, which he trained up to tri-mix level, and of which he qualified as an IANTD Evolution recreational instructor. He did his cave diving certification through the National Association of Cave Divers in the extensive cave systems of northern Florida. His discovery of the powered underwater cave system in Mactan Island during solo exploration dives in 2002 marked the birth of the cave diving culture in the central Philippines. Cave diving was not as popular as scuba diving in the Philippines until Dr. Amores started the Filipino Divers Association. In 2011, he made a dive with his unit to 100 meters or 330 feet. Quite a feat considering he was already 65 years old at that time. His efforts to go beyond certain barriers, such as age, made people truly believe that he could do anything. He lived his life to the fullest, embracing challenges and pushing boundaries, all while making a difference in the world. Therefore, when the news of his unforeseen tragedy circulated around the island of Mactan and those who knew him, it was seen as a devastating void that could never be filled. On June 17, 2014, Doc Amores and two of his cave diving students, one of which was named Jamie Lepac, arrived at the Enchanted River site. The purpose of the dive was to set up safety measures and a guideline for a wildlife film documentary crew, eager to capture footage of the river's mystical beauty. It should be noted that Doc, now 68 years old, was diagnosed with his heart ailment at the age of 40, but this did not stop him from cave diving. In addition, he was also admitted for pneumonia a few weeks before this dive. As mentioned prior, Dr. Amores was not the first to discover the cave system, but he was the first to discover the deeper chambers of the cave. In his previous exploration dives of this cave, Doc discovered a very tight passageway that led to a bigger chamber and a few more passageways. The passage was subsequently named Doc's Door. After completing their equipment checks, Doc and his fellow student divers prepared to descend into the depths of the Enchanted River. Diving in the Enchanted River is always a daunting challenge, and it is viewed as a great accomplishment for any diver who emerges unscathed. The cave entrance is narrow, allowing only one person to enter at a time. However, the current guided the team effortlessly inside. The same current that assisted them in entering the cave also made exiting very challenging, as the water tends to pull divers back towards the cave. If the current is not too strong, divers may be fortunate enough to make it out with ease. With this in mind, and the risks acknowledged, with Doc leading the way, the team began their descent into the cave system during low tide. The team descended 30 meters, or 98 feet, diving to the bottom of the pool. At this point, a large log can be seen that marks the split into a right and left lane to get to Doc's Door and the entry point to Mare's Chamber. Although the left lane, called Patrice's Way, located at 32 meters, or 102 feet, is an easier access point because it hugs a cavity on the left wall, which usually lessens the current flow. The team decided to enter Mare's Chamber, laying line in the right lane, called Bernil's Crawl, also located at 32 meters or 105 feet, which is a crawling descent to Doc's Door. As the team pushed forward, they attempted to enter through Bernil's Crawl, but they encountered a significant deposit of sediment in the fissure, causing the current to flow faster than they could handle. Consequently, they switched to Patrice's Way to reach Doc's Door. Unfortunately, the current in Patrice's Way was even stronger, and it proved to be even more challenging to enter. The primary reason for this difficulty was the fact that the team made their dive during the descending low tide. The low tide made the current flow of the cave's fresh water stronger due to the absence of an opposing force of the flooding seawater. In addition, while Patrice's Way is still wide enough for divers to enter the cave, the pileup of sediment in Bernil's Crawl eventually diverted the water flow into Patrice's Way, thus making it harder to overcome the outgoing flow. The team discovered that they needed to exercise extreme caution in response to the swift and forceful current, both entering and exiting the cave system. They were exerting too much effort and breathing more air than usual just to try to push into the cave. Despite the strong currents, it's unclear why Doc didn't decide to call off the dive at this point. In spite of the challenging conditions, Doc was determined to press on with the dive due to the upcoming documentary shoot for GMA's 7 Born to be Wild, which had enlisted the team's expertise, and Doc didn't want to disappoint the film crew. With this in mind, the team soldiered on and eventually made their way through Patrice's Way to reach Mayor's Chamber, taking care to lay line for the shoot the following day. This chamber was previously measured by Doc's team to be 37 metres or 121 feet long and 31 metres or 101 feet wide, with a max height of 8 metres or 26 feet. This time, more sedimentation on the bed made the bottom closer to the ceiling. There were several fish swimming with the team inside the chamber. The team continued their dive in the cave system and reached Kelvin's kneecap at a depth of 52 metres or 171 feet. They then proceeded to Paul's Passage and continued diving until they reached a depth of around 87 metres or 285 feet, at which point they decided to end the dive. 2 factors influenced this decision. Firstly, the team wasted a substantial amount of time and air trying to pass Patrice's Way, and they had to follow the rule of thirds, which meant ensuring that they had enough air to make it back to the surface. Secondly, they had already reached the limit of their planned exploration, and the film crew had no intention of venturing into the unexplored sections for the shoot the following day. Therefore, there was no potential profit to justify risking their lives in such a perilous situation, and they turned the dive. Unbeknownst to Doc and the team, a deadly siphon in Mayor's Chamber awaited them, which would mean they would need 2/3 and some extra to be able to exit the cave comfortably, a situation they were neither aware nor prepared to handle. Siphon comes from the French siphon, or Spanish siphon. It is a passage where the water reaches the roof, so there is no air movement between one side and the other. In general, these passages are considered to be more dangerous because of strong flow of the current. Upon their return to Mayor's Chamber, the team prepared to exit the cave by navigating a narrow passage through Doc's door. However, Jamie Lepac, one of the student divers, was taken aback when Doc changed the exit order, instructing the 2 cave diving students to proceed ahead of him. They were surprised, but could not argue because he was directing them. But Jamie noticed something irregular about Doc because he wasn't moving his feet. He did not respond when he made a hand "OK." Instead, he replied with his right arm up, signaling them to go ahead of him. While making their way towards the exit of Mayor's Chamber and approaching Doc's door, the team became trapped in a treacherous siphon, which was life-threatening to the team. Given that Doc was the last in line, the current proved to be extremely strenuous on his body and heart, putting him in greater danger. Despite being young and inexperienced, the students managed to summon enough strength to navigate through the strong current that was flowing through Doc's door. However, Doc struggled tremendously and was unable to pass the tight passageway through the current as it kept pulling him back into Mayor's Chamber, despite his multiple attempts. In fact, he grew weaker and more fatigued as he continued to push through the powerful current. Jamie noticed his mentor struggling and attempted to rescue him. However, Jamie's efforts were hindered by the fact that he was also running out of air due to swimming against the powerful current. When swimming against a current in cave diving, divers use more air compared to when swimming with the current, or when there is no current at all. This is because the resistance of the water flowing against the diver requires more effort and energy to swim, and as a result, the diver breathes more rapidly and consumes more air. As a result, the air supply of all team members was rapidly depleting and reaching critical levels, adding to the urgency of their escape from the cave. In cave diving, the primary rule is to prioritize your own safety first. Therefore, despite feeling helpless, the students were left with no option but to surface, leaving Doc trapped in the unforgiving currents of the siphon. The students continued their journey towards the exit, traversing through Doc's door and Patrice's Way, all whilst fighting the strong current. After his students departed, Doc knew he was in a very dire situation, and the probability of him surviving now was ever so slight. In a last-ditch effort to stay anchored, he tied one of his hands to the line to prevent the strong current from sweeping him away. Despite his dwindling oxygen levels and a resolve not to give up, Doc summoned his last ounce of strength and kicked his legs with all his might and tried to squeeze through the tight opening that was Doc's door. However, he was not getting enough air to compensate for his strenuous activity, and in a sudden turn of events, he suffered a heart attack due to the tension on his already weakened heart. At this point, Doc's chances of exiting the cave alive were next to impossible, and it would take a miracle for him to survive. He was trapped in a treacherous siphon, struggling to survive as his oxygen levels dwindled and his heart gave out. After a total dive time of 1 hour and 15 minutes, the students, completely drained, finally surfaced and immediately contacted the authorities, informing them of their mentor's dire situation. As they were aware of Doc's dwindling air supply, they knew that time was of the essence. Doc's brother, Lapu Lapu, City Vice Mayor Mario Amores, promptly travelled to Sarrigal del Sur upon receiving reports of the incident. When rescue divers arrived on the scene and assessed the situation, they realised that attempting to enter the cave system would prove fatal to their exit due to the powerful current. After inferring the tragic outcome, they made the heartbreaking decision to hold the rescue, as they knew that Doc would no longer be alive. The recovery operation would now become a body recovery. Jake Miranda, a cave diver from Cerrigo City, led the 8-hour retrieval of Doc's body, which was found 40 meters deep, submerged in Mayor's chamber. The autopsy reports conducted by the investigators in Cerrigo City confirmed that Doc died from a heart attack. The tragic incident caused the Enchanted River management to temporarily close the area. Doc's body was brought back to Cebu and laid to rest on Wednesday at the Mactan Memorial Gardens after a 10 a.m. Mass at Our Lady of Sacred Heart Parish in Barangay Maragondon, Lapu Lapu City. He is survived by his wife, Luz, a son and 2 daughters. It is a heartbreaking tragedy that once again highlights the dangers of cave diving. While these brave divers know the risks involved, it doesn't make it any less devastating when something like this happens. Doc Amores dedicated his life to exploring the mysteries of the underwater world, but unfortunately, his passion ultimately led to his untimely death. It is a reminder of just how fragile life can be, and how quickly things can go wrong, even for the most experienced divers. Doc's family and loved ones are left to mourn his passing, and the diving community has lost a true pioneer. May he rest in peace. This has been Gripping Horror. I hope to see you in the next one.